There's some state news happening that has a local angle, and we're sharing it as a Florida Matters podcast extra. Former Republican Congressman David Jolly, a Pinellas County native, is running for governor on the Democratic ticket. I talked to Jolly about a switch from Republican to Democrat and why he wants to be Florida's next governor. David, you've launched a political committee, Florida 2026. In April, you registered as a Democrat, and you've been talking with Democratic clubs around the state. So just for the record, are you running for governor?
I am running for governor of the state of Florida as a Democrat, and I am running because we are in the midst of an affordability crisis that is impacting every community, every person, every walk of life, regardless of your voter registration, Republican, Democrat, or Independent. We have an affordability crisis in the state of Florida that I think has people questioning whether Florida can be a home for them. That's a lived experience for my wife and I. We have two young children. And I don't think Republicans in Tallahassee are doing anything to tangibly change that. I think there's a coalition of Floridians that wants and is demanding change, and I hope to offer an opportunity to provide that.
I don't mean to be cynical with this question, but are you saying that you are struggling to get by?
Listen, we are fortunate, we are blessed, but look, I'm the son of a preacher. I don't come from independent means. I don't come from wealth. Our children are 6 and 4. I will be working well into retirement, but here's what I know. Florida is becoming less and less affordable for everyone. Property insurance and property taxes are impacting homeowners, retirees, and renters. We are seeing roads being built that require tolls. Our schools now have a voucher system that requires families to usually pay the school even in addition to the voucher. We simply are in the midst of an affordability crisis, and I think you could make the argument that policies out of Tallahassee have created it, but we at least know they're not providing a solution to it. And I actually do think there are solutions. Look, I've been out of politics long enough to tell the truth. I'm not somebody that is just going to say, hey, we can change everything. We only change everything if we demand change and we have solutions. And so, look, I think we need a state catastrophic fund to remove hurricane coverage out of the private insurance market, reducing private insurance in some cases by 60%. We need not just property tax cuts, we need property tax reform, just like we did 25 years ago with Save Our Homes. We need a reform package that lets first-time home buyers, younger families, actually be able to enter the home buying market. We need to reduce car insurance, utility rates by bringing in renewable, clean energies. There's so much we can do, but I believe as a citizen, much less as a candidate, that Republicans in Tallahassee will do nothing to address the affordability crisis.
All right, let's go back to your roots in Tampa Bay for a moment, if we could. Now, you were born in Dunedin. Your father was a Baptist preacher, as you mentioned. You grew up in Dade City, graduated from Pasco High School. What was that Pinellas County upbringing like?
Yeah, so my father was a pastor at Calvary Baptist Church in the 70s. I was born, our closest hospital was Meast, Dunedin. We did move to Miami for about 10 years where he pastored a church. And I should say, at least in terms of our family, my mother was in ministry alongside my father all those years. My father's passed. My mom is still with us, living in Dade City. But we did live in Pasco. I lived in Escambia for a while, but Pinellas has always been home. And, for the better part of my career, I guess almost 20 years, I spent working with the former Congressman Bill Young, who represented Pinellas County. And then when Mr. Young passed away in office, ultimately, though I wasn't looking to run for office at the time, I ended up a member of Congress about 12 weeks later.
And he had a pretty long tenure, right? I think he was elected in 1971, and as you point out, he passed away in 2013. So that's 40 plus years.
That's right.
Different era of politics, right? I mean, he was an old school Republican that's almost kind of unrecognizable today.
Yeah, looking back, as a young Republican, I thought, oh, who's this old stodgy Republican? It turns out I had the opportunity for 20 years to learn from someone who was a true legislator. And I'm not sure we see that a lot in politics today, right? We see ideologues. Mr. Young was a legislator. In terms of ideology, he would say, when he got to Congress in the 70 election, he was a conservative. By 2013, he was a squishy moderate, but he hadn't changed. The party had. But look, I learned the importance of legislating, of taking responsibility when you accept the public trust to govern, to actually provide solutions for people. I would say ideologically, though, remarkably, I was to the left of Mr. Young. If Mr. Young was a squishy moderate, maybe I was a little squishier when I had the opportunity to serve Even as a Republican, I supported marriage equality, climate science, gun control, campaign finance reform, and was the only Republican to vote against the Planned Parenthood investigation. I tried to restore funding for reproductive services when Republicans tried to cut it from the Planned Parenthood, corporate entity. Still not good enough for the reproductive freedom movement at the time. I understand that, but mine has been a journey of learning how to give voice to a diverse community and my values, I think, as I've had to do self-reflection on my political journey over a decade. I really mean this earnestly. I think my values have been the same all along. My
Mm.
politics may have changed, but look, I grew up in a home of ministry and service. I see public service the same way, but just in terms of politics, I think the government should provide an economy that works for all people, everyone, everyone. It should work for everyone. The government should actually serve the people as well, our seniors, our veterans, ensure on quality public education, provide for roads, safe communities. But finally, a government should lift everybody up, embrace everybody, empower everybody, give dignity and respect to everyone, regardless of where you were born, where you came from, the color of your skin, who you love, who you worship. Those have been values that I think if you looked at how I tried to serve in Congress, hopefully I reflected those. I was an independent for 6 years, hopefully reflecting those, but those are values that I believe make up the heartbeat of the Democratic Party. And so, it wasn't a pivot for me, it was a journey politically, but I'm proud to try to represent the Democratic coalition in the governor's race in 2026.
I want to just come back to something you were talking about before uh, about reproductive freedom. So when you campaigned in 2014, when you were campaigning for Congress back then, more than 10 years ago, you were pro-life, right? I mean, that was your platform, and now, as you say, you've kind of come around. You talk about codifying Roe v. Wade. Like, what was the change there? Because that is a shift to the left.
Sure. That is a journey, and a lot of my critics would like to use that against me. I think that's a strength. I think that's a strength of my candidacy because I think I ask a question in politics, is it okay to change your mind? And I think the answer is yes, and I think most people have changed their minds. Certainly Republicans have changed their minds, right? Since the advent of Donald Trump, it's now a party that believes in being in your doctor's office and in your classrooms. It's not the party of less government. It's not the party of fiscal responsibility. Diehard Republicans have changed dramatically in the last 10 years. I have as well. I think a lot of voters have changed. Your politics evolve. And so, look, I think, again, fairly earnestly, you could follow my journey where I readily admit I wrongly conflated my faith teachings when I entered politics, my faith teachings around life with being anti-Roe. And as I grew and saw what the impact was on reproductive care during the Planned Parenthood debates, for instance, where I sided with Democrats, and certainly in the post-Dobbs environment where the darker themes emerge, I am confident in saying that I'm for the codification of the Roe-Casey framework. That's true at the national level. That's true at the state level. I think we should implement Amendment 4 that more than 50% of the voters asked for. But that is a journey. That is a journey. And, former Governor Chris used to say, I never changed. I didn't leave the party left me. That's not my story. David Jolly changed. And I think a lot of voters have changed. And so where my critics like to come at me with, oh, but you've changed your mind. Yeah, that's not a weakness. That's a strength. We need
Mm.
more politicians willing to admit they were wrong and change and evolve and meet the moment where voters are.
Maybe so, but it seems like we're in an era where voters are rewarding politicians who are hewing to one kind of set of views and hewing pretty strongly to that. I mean, you mentioned Charlie Crist. He was a Republican when he was governor of Florida. He switched to the Democratic Party, ran for governor as a Democrat again in 2022. He lost by nearly 20 percentage points. So, what makes you think you can succeed where he failed?
Respectfully, I'm not Charlie Crist. As I mentioned, I've debated Charlie Crist. He insisted he never changed. I have changed, and I think voters want to see someone who has changed. I also think campaign election cycles are about meeting the moment and meeting voters where they are at. This is a moment in Florida where we have an affordability crisis during an election cycle where national voters are demanding change. Maybe because it's the 6 month of or 6 year of a presidency. Maybe it's because the affordability crisis is crippling Republicans as much as it's crippling Democrats. But this cycle is a different cycle than past cycles. People are demanding change. They don't want more of the same. And so I think if we lead into that cycle saying we can elect more Republicans and have more of the same, you can have your affordability crisis, or we can have change. And then I also would say this. A governor's race can be very different for voters. We see voters behave differently in a governor's race than a presidential race, than a U.S. Senate race. It is hard to extract our personal identity from national politics. But a governor's race is about safe communities, good public schools, an economy that works, roadways that aren't tolled. And and what we saw, for instance, in Kentucky, deep red Kentucky that elected Democrat Andy Beshear, deep red Montana elected Democrat Steve Bullock. To me, that is this race and this cycle. If we build a coalition not focused on people's political parties, not focused on the President of the United States, but focused on attacking the affordability crisis and returning dignity to people in the state of Florida, that's a coalition that can win the governorship next November. I'm confident of that.
You are facing some pretty strong currents against you, though. I mean, Democratic Party registrations are continuing to slide. There are just over 4.3 million registered Democrats in Florida compared to more than 5.5 million registered Republicans, and nearly a third claim no party at all. So if you were to win, you'd have to really capture a lot of voters who are of that no party affiliation persuasion when it comes to their voter registration. How, like, can you do that? I mean, you've talked about affordability. So is that the way to grab those voters?
Yeah, what I love about being a Democrat is we get to accept math, and the math is challenging in this race for a Democrat. Um, so I would suggest a couple of things. I spent 6 years in the independent space trying to organize it with Christy Todd Whitman of New Jersey and Andrew Yang and other national leaders, and so I understand the independent space very well. It's wrong to think everyone's a moderate in that space. It's a very pluralist space. Even today, I'm for lower corporate taxes, but more gun safety legislation.
Right. There's quite a few libertarians in that mix as well, right?
Yeah, and honestly, the independent space is very suspicious of the major parties. I know, I lived it. I got in an argument with, or not an argument, a conversation with James Carville. He would say to me, "You're just taking votes from the Democratic Party." And I said, "James, independent voters are available to the Democratic Party. It's the Democratic Party that won't reach out to them." And so my job is to lead a coalition that recognizes the Democratic Party's values are the right values to lead us forward. But there are not enough Democratic votes in Florida. So how do we build a community with the independents who want change? Part of that is just making sure we're focused on the main thing, which is the affordability crisis. But for Democrats, that also means doing a few things differently. We have to go into places Democrats haven't gone before. I have to sit in the faith community as a person of faith and say, this is why I think democratic values better align with the teachings of faith. Not just my Christian faith, but all faiths share a certain orientation around love, charity, kindness, respect, dignity. Why I think democratic values represent faith values. I need to go into ag communities and say, your labor markets are tight because of Ron DeSantis' attack on immigration. I can go to gun owners and say, gun owners may not be the problem. They're not. But our gun laws are, and if we strengthen them, we'll protect your kids just like we'll protect ours.
Are you a gun owner yourself?
I am not, no. Um, but I also need to be able to go into, Democrats need to be able to go into South Florida and say communism and socialism are wrong. We can condemn the dictators that people have fled from while lifting up immigrants who came here from Cuba, Venezuela, Haiti, and other places. We can do that. We can say capitalism provides opportunity, but we're the party to fight for fair capitalism and rules that make sure everybody gets lifted up and nobody gets left behind. I'm not sure Democrats have done that before. If we are to succeed in building a coalition led by Democrats, we must do that. We must do that. And what we essentially are asking a number of Floridians to do next November is to perform differently in the ballot in the voting booth than perhaps they reflexively otherwise would. I think we can do that, but we have to be in every community. Look, I've already done a dozen town halls. I was in Zephyr Hills, and a man stood up and said the last Democrat in this hall was Lawton Childs. I was on
Wow.
the courthouse steps in Naples, and a man stood up and said, "Thank you for remembering that a Democratic vote in a statewide election counts the same in Collier County as it does in Broward." I've been in Fernandina Beach and Palm Coast. Our job is to excite and turn out Democratic voters all around the state, including Broward, Miami-Dade, and Palm Beach. But where Democrats have won in the past, we got to win by more, and where we've lost, we got to lose by less. But that takes being in those communities.
I mean, the Democratic Party in Florida is it's been in a bit of a shambolic state, I think it's fair to say, in the last couple of cycles. And you have the likes of, Jason Pizzo, former Senate Minority Leader, quitting the party early this year, saying the party is dead. So, I mean, is this a good time to join this party and think to yourself, I'm the person who can kind of be the standard bearer?
Look, I say this about Jason Pizzo. I have enormous respect for anyone who follows their political compass. I did it, right? I disagree with his decision. I think the way to change Florida is by having the Democratic Party take a strong leadership position to lead us forward. But it does go back to recognizing Jason is right that there are independent voters who can't find a home. So the job is for Democrats to give them a home. That's a challenge, right? I'm sober about the challenge we're facing. I think we have to recognize that for change to come, the environment has to be one that supports change. If next fall we truly are in that moment where the entire country is experiencing a generational change election, if the affordability crisis in Florida is pushing voters to think more about their personal economies than their personal voter registration, and if we are a candidate and a campaign that is focused not on the president, not on partisanship, we're not taking the bait that Republicans want to put in front of us, but we're focused on big solutions to the affordability crisis. If we are that coalition, then we've got a shot to win this. I only got into this race because I know there's a pathway, and I believe we will win.
I know this is a statewide campaign, and you're setting your sights on communities all across the state. But you are from Pinellas County. You know the region, Tampa Bay, pretty well. What's your message to Tampa Bay area voters? Like, what would you say to them specifically to vote for you in 2026?
Look, I think I'm going to say it again, the affordability crisis in Tampa Bay is the same as around the state, but I think we especially experienced natural disasters and tragedy last year that are fresh on people's minds. The ability to rebuild, the loss of lives, the property insurance market that has created home ownership to be perhaps unaffordable for many, a property tax crisis, roadways that are being tolled instead of open roadways for everybody. The education crisis is a lived experience in our community where people are looking for a public school, but it's been starved of resources. Excellence in public schools today exists only because of the sheer will and determination and talent of our teachers and our administrators. But Republicans gave you a voucher that's not covering the cost of tuition. That's my lived experience in Pinellas County in the Tampa Bay area. And I know it is of millions of others, but that's a lived experience all around the state. And I mean this, whether I'm a candidate or just a citizen. Tallahassee is not responding in this moment how we need them to respond. They're just not. They don't feel the urgency. They don't see the crisis. They are fine that Florida has become a home for the rich and the reckless. I want a home. I want Florida to be a home for everyone. And I think most people in the Tampa Bay area and Pinellas County agree with that.
Campaigns in Florida are pretty expensive, right? I mean, in America and generally, you've got to have a lot of grit. You got to have a lot of money on your side too. And I feel like since you were last in Congress, elbows may have gotten a little sharper. Are you ready for this kind of financially and I guess morally as well, or are you psyched for this race?
Well, have I told you I'm for the public financing of campaigns? You want to talk about areas where I've moved and evolved? Some will remember my spotlight on 60 Minutes for trying to take on Washington with campaign finance. Look, I think we have laws in Tallahassee that allow for legal corruption, right? When Governor DeSantis says, I don't care what Key West voters want, I'm going to let big ships come in and then takes $1 million from the cruise industry. That's corruption. It just happens to be legal. We need to change the laws. Look, this will be a very expensive race. Republicans will outraise Democrats 2-1, maybe 3-1. This is home of MAGA. This is where a state where Republicans have had a supermajority for decades. So we will be outspent. Of course, we will outwork. But here's the most important thing. I'm not going to play the expectation games early of how much can we raise. We've gotten a lot of support and commitments already from donors, small dollar donors across the country, large donors. It's fantastic. We need that. But I have told our team internally, and I say this to press and folks publicly, I'm not playing the quarterly expectation games on money. What I do know is that for me, the first metric is about February of next year. By February of next year, if we have sufficient cash on hand, which I'm confident we will, and the polls show this to be 7 to 8 points instead of the 14 points we saw last November, then watch out, because then we move to July. we have it in low single digits, and we have our next cash on hand number, and then we go to November and win. If we create that environment, we follow those metrics, I'm not worried about the amount of money because we will have momentum on our side and the national donor base will be there for us.
David Jolly, thank you so much for your time. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Good to be with you.
Florida Matters executive producer is Grayson Doctor. Editorial guidance from Mary Shedden. Tune in Tuesday evenings at 6:30 on WUSF 89.7. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and watch on YouTube. I'm Matthew Petty. Thanks for listening.